Let me also welcome you very warmly. My name is Sylvia Cook. I was already introduced, and it's a great pleasure to be here at this conference. I was listening very intensively to the very interesting discussions and presentations, and now we're coming to the last part of the 4th International Conference on Active Noise Abatement. Experts from all over the world have discussed how planes can fly much quieter than before. You discussed curved approach, ILS, GBS, GBAS, RNP, and all kinds of elements which can be changed or fine-tuned in order to improve the situation for residents living around the airport. And we learned that in a city like Frankfurt with many skyscrapers, and I learned that they're playing a role in noise production because 2 days ago there was a symposium organized by the Museum for Architecture on skyline, which is increasing noise. And we learned that the new Henninger Tower, which is under one flight path, is, for example, causing more noise. There was a noise break, because the old Henninger Tower had to be torn down. Now a new one is almost completed, which is creating more than 8 decibel more, because we have so much glass in that building. And the same is true for the new European Central Bank. A lot of glass which is reflecting the noise. But still, the Minister of Hesse, Volker Bouffier, says Frankfurt, as a financial location, would not be the same without the airport. And therefore, we're talking about the economy, we're talking about traffic, and this is why we would like to get started right away. Let me welcome the panelists. Some of them are waiting here, maybe others are waiting in front of that room. I don't know whether the Hessian Minister of Economics, Energy, Transport and Regional Development is here. He has not arrived yet. Tarek Al-Wazir, maybe he will join us at the end of my introduction. Then we have Klaus Fröse from Lufthansa. He is very close. He is on his way to the panel. Welcome. He is in charge of the biggest Lufthansa hub worldwide. Mr. Fröse, take something to drink, a glass of water, find a place where you stand comfortably. So this was Klaus Fröse. Then let us welcome Thomas Jöhe, the mayor of Rheinheim, having 15,000 inhabitants directly bordering Frankfurt. Mr. Jöhe, and he's not only the mayor of Rheinheim, he is also the chairman of the Frankfurt Air Noise Commission, which was founded 50 years ago and which is something like the role model for other commissions. They are also taken on board whenever noise is being discussed with the municipalities, and their target is noise abatement for people living in the environment of an airport. Bruno Silva, you've probably met him before. He held a presentation yesterday, and he is the Environment Officer, Air Transport Bureau, ICAO, in Montreal, which means he is an expert of an agency which belongs to the United Nations. The next panelist is Matthias von Randau. He is the Executive Director of the German Aviation Association, BDL in German. BDL is located in Berlin in the House of Luftfahrt. A warm welcome to you. And the members of BDL are airlines, the German ones, the German airports, and German air traffic control. And then let us welcome Professor Dr. Johann Dietrich Wörner, coming from Paris. He is the chairman of FFR, Director General of European Space Agency ESA, but he is not wearing that hat today. He is here on behalf of the Forum Flughafen und Region, FFR. This is, so to speak, the umbrella organization of the Umwelthaus organization, which has organized this conference here. And he is a mediator as well. So I don't know whether all parties involved know what mediation means. And here, let us welcome Tarek Al-Wazir, the Minister of Economics, Energy, Transport and Regional Development of Hessen.
Was die Mediation bedeutet hat. Also es gab irgendwann mal Ende der 90er in Frankfurt.
What does mediation mean? At the end of the 90s, it was decided to build a new runway in Frankfurt. And back then, it was the Hesse Minister President, Hans Eichel, who said, we have to do something. We have to make sure that we take the citizens on board when it comes to discussing and developing the new runway. And we did not want to have warlike scenarios as we had it when the runway west was built in the 80s. And this is why there was a mediating procedure with different developments, and in the year 2000 the recommendation was given to build the new runway. And not only that, in that package there was also a recommendation contained for a nighttime ban and a package on active noise abatement. And back then people said this kind of extensive dialogue needs to be continued. And then the Forum Frankfurt Flughafen, which means airport and region, was established. And the FFR target is to have less noise and to have a social dialogue. Let's get started right away without much further ado. We don't have that much time. Mr. Al-Wazir. It was 3 years ago when you took over the office with a lot of stamina and energy, yes we can like. And then you encountered difficulties and challenges. Then you could not close the northwest runway, you could not do anything about the building of the third terminal in Frankfurt, and the noise limit you announced in September, is that your last try, so to speak? Well, there are different kind of perspectives you can take looking at the airport. I never asked to close down that runway. I've never demanded that. And by the way, some people criticized me for not having demanded the closure of that runway. I recall autumn 2011 when people were really excited and when I was criticized a lot. The Green Party was criticized massively. The journalists said they were always against an additional runway, and now, 10 years after the first criticism, they are approving the runway. But that's not true. If you take a look at the history of the Frankfurt airport, you will see that all the discussions we had on the different expansion periods, we can see broken promises everywhere. And therefore, you have to think twice in a specific situation. How can you make sure that you're bringing together things and aspects which collide? How can you make sure that a compromise can be found, that a situation can be improved? And right from the beginning I said, the best I can achieve is the following. I would like to make sure that the end of one term of office, everybody feels a little bit disappointed. I don't want to have cheerful people at the end of my office. I would like to have people thinking about what we've done. Okay, people who are partly unsatisfied, unhappy. And let me tell the foreign guests that Tarek Al-Wazir is a Green minister belonging to the Green Party, representing the party Bündnis 90 Die Grünen in Hesse. And we have a black Green government coalition, which means the Christian Democratic Union is cooperating with the Green Party. And when the Terminal 3 was discussed, we used to have all kinds of coalitions. We used to have a socialist and conservative coalition, a green one and a red one, and now we have the black and green one. Now, we're talking about a new topic, the noise limits. You said that there shouldn't be any limits to air traffic movements. You would like to have a threshold, an upper limit for noise. And you said that if such a noise limit is exceeded, the parties involved will get a warning, and after that warning, they would probably have to pay something like a penalty or a fine, which is really hurtful. What do you say about that, Mr. Werner? Well, when it comes to the noise limit, then people who do not know Frankfurt that well should know that the mediation package, which was introduced by Mrs. Cook, had different aspects. The expansion, the regional dialogue, the anti-noise package, the night ban, and an optimization of the airport. These were the different packages contained in that mediation project. And the proposal on noise limits were made 2 years ago, and people did not reject it right away. Nobody was cheerful, neither, but people said if we cheer too loud, it will lead to disadvantages here in Hesse when it comes to urban development. Back then it was asked, shouldn't we rather restrict the number of flights in order to have less noise? And this is also part of the mediation package. There is one sentence saying, shouldn't we restrict the number of planes flying over Frankfurt? But how can I reduce noise? That's not that easy. We can say, for example, a take-off procedure should not be louder than 50 decibel, but this is nonsense. Depends on what plane type you have and so on. And then systems were developed, and one system I was promoting for quite a while, which is focusing on the annoyance or the reduction of the annoyance of residents. It is the model which is also backed by the Minister of Economics, Energy and Transport, Mr. Wazir, which has also an economic focus. Both projects and programs want to minimize the noise impact. And today we can say that the mediation process has been reworked and that many things have already been implemented. We have the expansion of the airport, we have improvements here and there. Of course, we know that continuous improvement has to be made. And I believe that the dialogue with the city of Frankfurt and the municipalities is something which needs to be refreshed here and there. We have the night flight ban, which means between 11 p.m. and 5 a.m. And then we also have the transition times, which have to be respected, because the last hour before the night ban starts and before the night ban ends have more traffic and more noise. And if we take the upper noise levels and the future project, a quieter airport, we have many keywords for that, then we can talk about a completed package. You talked about the nighttime flight ban from 11 p.m. and 5 o'clock in the morning. Mr. Juhe, as a mayor of a heavily impacted city, I can imagine that you would not like to live in Raunheim without the nighttime ban. The nighttime ban is of utmost importance, and those who recall the former situation when we had air traffic until 1 o'clock at night, and then there was a short break, and at 3 o'clock you could hear the first planes again. They are celebrating it every day. But there are also some exceptions, and these exceptions lead to stress. Yes, of course. I mean, you're expecting quiet, which starts at 11 o'clock, then you are annoyed by planes which are still flying at midnight. But still, the situation has dramatically improved. So you sound very satisfied. No, I'm not completely satisfied. Mr. Fröse, at Lufthansa there is a lot of unsatisfaction, especially when it comes to the noise limits. Do you have a lobby in Frankfurt? Well, our lobby is there, and this lobby is a friendly one, much more friendlier than the pilots at the moment. But when it comes to noise and minimizing noise, as I would like to call it, then we're talking about a very serious topic. We're taking it very seriously, and we're very committed here. And our ideas on how to minimize noise, our ideas on who the players are and where the money comes from, what is needed, well, there are discussions and different ideas. We believe that we need a very transparent system for measuring noise, a system which is also understandable by each and every citizen. A 747 produces that much noise, an A320 produces that much noise, and if I look up in the sky, I will see what kind of plane it is, and I can imagine. I can simply make a calculation what kind of noise is being produced, and we have a contingent model which is based on systems which are being used in London or in San Francisco, and we're discussing them. How can we help? This is what we are discussing in Lufthansa. And what are restrictions? Okay, so you are discussing, and how far have you come in these discussions? When could we get this kind of noise upper limit? Because we're talking about something voluntary, as far as I know.
Das haben unsere Diskussion ergeben. Der Herr Minister, das darf ich sagen, ist da sehr ehrgeizig.
Our minister, if I may say so, is very ambitious in this respect. The working group meets every 2 weeks, and just recently somebody from the working group wished me a very Merry Christmas because we had the last meeting this year, but we will meet soon in 2017 to discuss where the money comes from, what the targets are. And Mr. von Randorf, do you think that a system like that, a noise limit, could be introduced at each and every German airport? Well, hearing that question, I'm thinking of 2 questions myself. I would like to ask a question to Mr. Al-Wazir. Tarek Al-Wazir said something very important. He said, we have to be careful with complying. We have to be careful with making promises and keeping them, and avoiding that these promises which are given are taken seriously by everybody, and some promises turn into laws. And how can we make sure that we have the right laws which are also safeguarding Germany as an industrial location? And Mr. Tarek Al-Wazir, we are discussing these kind of issues on a constant basis with you. We said what is not acceptable for us is the non-compliance with laws. With all due respect and understanding, it is also our target to have some noise limits, but these noise limits must be voluntary. And let me tell you that the biggest challenge in transport policy is to have noise emissions and emissions of pollutants. And we have to reduce both of them, emissions and noise. And when it comes to air traffic, then we have to invest in quiet and efficient planes, which costs a lot of money. And we get a lot of support from you, Mr. Wazir, but unfortunately there is one sector where we don't get any support. And this is why I ask you, Mr. Wazir, please make sure that the framework conditions we have here in Germany improve in such a way that we're not losing in the international competition. Because the international competitiveness is a prerequisite for being able to invest in quiet and energy-efficient planes. And they will bring the most of the benefit for the people. We will have less noise and less CO2. Okay, so both ministers are asked here. Let me start like this. If we implemented a noise limit model which gives you an incentive to reduce noise as quickly as possible and as much as possible, which might result in investing in a younger fleet. And Mr. Randolph, you have probably heard that already. Then the biggest German airline will order the A350, and integrate it into the fleet and have the headquarters in Munich. And here we would have then the 340 in Frankfurt. This is what the situation will be from January onwards. And we say that we have to consider what our part could be, what our contribution could be, what needs to be modernized, and which modernization has to take place here. It has to take place here because we are one of the biggest airports, very poorly located. This is our disadvantage. I know that Munich is also discussing a second and a third additional runway, but if you take a look at the geographical situation in Munich, then you might know that 50 years ago people decided to change from Riem to another, to Erding in Munich, which means a completely different location in Munich, but we stayed at exactly the same position. And we know that the airline industry is facing huge difficulties, and we also do know that the airport does not necessarily have the same interests like the airlines. I have, for example, one application for reducing charges at the airports on my desk. And I have learned, and this was clear to me before, but now I can see that it's practically also true, which is reflected in Wilfried Kretschmann's saying. He says, you have to differentiate between real complaining and false complaining. How can we make sure that we have a competitive German airline industry, and how can we make sure that we are making use of all kinds of progress and technological innovations which do exist? If I said tomorrow, this is just an idea, if Mr. Schäuble and Mr. Dobrindt told us tomorrow that we are going to reduce all the charges, abolish them, what kind of consequence would that have if the airlines wouldn't have to pay any charges any longer to the government of Germany? Then you will see that at the end of the day it is important to create instruments which help us to improve in all sectors. And we're not only talking about noise, as I already said, even if we're discussing that intensively at this conference. When it comes to costs, when it comes to CO2 emissions, when it was 5, 6, 7 years ago, when we had to face an oil price which was higher than $100 per barrel, then people were demanding fuel-efficient planes. Now we're getting them, the A320 Neo, A350, which means we have a win for profit. And here we do have quieter planes. We have other turbines. We did not want to reduce noise only, we wanted to reduce fuel consumption at the same time. But when it comes to descent procedures, the progress is not that big, and therefore we have to continue with our deliberations and our research in order to make sure that the people will profit. How can that be created? Don't abolish the airline charges. 560 million are being paid by the airlines here in Germany. Make a program with 565 million euros, and we are giving you investment support, investment aid. We cannot finance everything alone, which can be used as an incentive to buy fuel-efficient and CO2-efficient planes. But unfortunately, Tarek Al-Wazir cannot decide alone to abolish the airline charges. But I'm going to ask my colleagues whether this is possible, and then we'll see.
But anyways, there are politicians who can distinguish real complaints from fake complaints, and then there are residents who have to pay attention to both politics and economics. Complaining from the point of view of economy and policy. There is true complaining. That's the one of those affected, and we have to take that seriously, residents affected. And I'm grateful that we have conferences like this, because they show what's possible with active noise abatement. But Mr. von Randau, you just mentioned that you wanted to do everything voluntary if possible. But experience has shown to us that from all what has been identified in all these years in terms of active noise abatement measures, we are at snail's pace. And there are reasons for that, because air traffic is not prepared to actively participate in planning and demanding the respective requirements to manufacturers or whatever, but also the embarrassing actions like we buy new airplanes with the respective equipment for GBAS, but they don't activate it because it's 40,000 euros they have to pay per plane. And we need it urgently. We had so many presentations on that, how you can fly around densely populated areas. That's absolutely urgent. Something has to happen. And you provoke upper limits for noise at sites like that because they don't have sufficient legal basis for that. You don't have a clear target, so that planes that are not equipped are not allowed to fly certain routes. We don't have that possibility, and there is a blocking. I think of the Federal Council initiative of Hesse, Rhineland-Palatinate, and Baden-Württemberg. I mean, it was not damaging. It didn't produce any extra costs, but it interfered into air traffic law, and that's not what they want. So they're very close to decision makers, but nothing happens. So in a nutshell, if you don't do anything here, must not be surprised that at heavy loaded areas, people demand upper noise limits, and that's what federal states might do. Checking facts. As we are talking about the snail's pace of innovation capability of airlines, just very quickly, what has happened in terms of new modern equipment lately? And we have the new engine technology with cold airflow. the Airbus 380, more than 100 ordered 320neos, the 350 goes to Munich first, the first 10. What we shall do with the remaining 14 depends probably on you. And 777, here we decided as well, the new 777-900 that will come 2020 shall also go to Frankfurt. So it's billions that we spend. And how can you say in that context that the airline economy is hesitating? I can't understand that. Think of that. Think of the vortex generator when it came. They said certification is so difficult. So this little vortex generator is not that much. With the 320, it should have been installed years ago, more than a decade. Is it this little piece? That costs you about 10 euros, I said, but the certification and bolting the screws would cost you something in addition. But even if you said, they said 3,000 euros per plane, I mean, then a lot of paperwork would have been added. But it could have been so easy to do that and to take these proposals up in a very positive way. And even with little things, you don't do anything. That's what people might say. ICANA, this European organization, they are much driven by the private air traffic economy. And there are already targets about noise reduction. We are lagging behind. But if you take them seriously and then assume a upper limit of noise that is legally on the basis of what has been decided, you never ever have a problem. You are always flying under the upper limit. Whether it's determined by the minister or by myself, you are definitely under it if you do something. The targets of air traffic economy. Probably different partners have to do something to make sure that the snail space is overcome. And here I would like to ask Mr. Silva right now, why is it that certain procedures take so long, or what could ICANA do so that noise can be reduced as quickly as possible?
Well, this was a question yesterday, and of course we are a huge organization of 191 states, so we can't make sharp turns in terms of regulation. But it was very interesting to see here on these 2 days how the technology is evolving with the examples here from Germany. And this is the kind of thing that we are looking at, like to take the good examples, to take the good lessons learned, and to try to foster the implementation of this kind of good practices into the other countries. But of course it takes time, and it takes a lot of, there are some countries who don't have the same levels of expertise needed to implement the specific solutions and the best practices in terms of technology. But that's our job. That's why what we try to do there. But of course it takes time. I know it may.
Why is it of course? Why is it of course?
Well, because it is 191 states and they need to agree on.
Yeah, but all the airports are different anyhow. And of course safety is safety first. But you will still, even after a process, you will not have the same airports all over the world. Of course, for the pilots, it's important that they have a coherent system worldwide. I understand. But at the same time, for instance, if Frankfurt and together with the airlines and so on, if we have better procedures which are helpful here, which are not disturbing the others, yes, this is important.
That's but then this difference that needs to be made concerning noise issues. They're local issues, and you're free to do whatever that does not impact on international civil aviation traffic. And I can clearly see that you're doing it, right? So, but I was talking about taking these experiences and taken to the other airports in the world so that they can also implement these solutions locally.
Herr Jühl, wollten Sie direkt darauf eingehen?
Wir haben hier 2013 eine Frankfurt.
Well, in 2013 we had this Frankfurt Declaration which says what has to be done. And even at the national level, it's not implemented with passion. We talked about the airlines and the private economy here. But if even at the national level, that is national German policy that doesn't support it, how can I expect that those who are delegated to ICAO all of a sudden would develop passion? that's a big, big problem. But I do believe that Mr. Silva has become really passionate as he talked about the good examples that he learned about at this conference, like, the one presented by Professor Hahn, the Airbus system. Mr. Fröse, would that be something for Lufthansa? Because in connection with this presentation, they only talked about Condor. As a matter of fact, also for Lufthansa, I'm not so sure that we don't participate here. I can proudly say that we are an airline that is really leading in procedures, and we support research and development in many, many areas. Professor Werner is nodding. I've seen that in his gesture. This is our contribution, apart from this big, big financial contribution. We use our know-how and our skills and share it with industry and research it, and thus make a contribution. And GBUS is one example. Of course, that's a technology of the future, but we need regulation for it, and so also in the final descent, it will allow us to don't do the straight-in approaches in order to circumvent noise-sensitive regions. We are on the way. We can't do it from one day to another, but we help. An airline like Lufthansa is not negating the issue of noise here in Frankfurt. On the contrary, the opposite is true. Nature helps you. The more quiet a plane is, the less fuel it consumes. That helps you. So therefore, we come back to the Minister of Economic Affairs and Transport. Yeah. And energy. Yeah, that's true. It comes all together. And let me underline here, our discussions that we held with the different actors are not always on friendly terms. Sometimes different expectations are mentioned. And in the true sense of the word, we always sit on the other side of the table. But I have to admit that the noise issue that was not that important a few years ago becomes more and more important nowadays. That's true. But let me also say, if you consider what movement joined in, well, you started with the mediation procedure. Professor Werner described anti-noise pact when it was promised. And if we are honest, when did it take full swing? Once the other parts had been processed and the impact was felt. But the basic idea at the beginning was a different one. So it's very much dependent on pressure being exerted. And this pressure needs to be passed on somehow so that we can achieve results. But let me give you the example of two airlines at that location. Of course, different interests need to be considered. A320 of Air Berlin don't have the vortex generator. This unit of 10 euros. Okay, not 10 euros. There are only two big suppliers in the world, and they have this material value 10 euros, but it costs much more, of course. But that's a different issue. So they don't use it, Air Berlin. But all Air Berlin planes can use GBUS. Why? Because they fly to some holiday islands where there is no ILS. And for that reason, it has a lot to do with the, respective wishes and necessities for the respective airline. And if you don't exert pressure, nothing will happen. And let me say, incentives, that's your example. Incentives. Okay, yesterday we had a vivid discussion in the regional parliament about fees for Fraport as of the 1st of January 2017. And it is never ever perceived that part of this fee application is not only the question who pays how much if you want to be a newcomer to this airport, but it's also an increase of noise-dependent shares, plus 15%. That's the new fee structure. And GBUS incentivation is also there. So everyone who lands here for the first 100 approaches gets a rebate if you are GBUS released. In the public debate, that's not heard. Fraport has done a lot, in that direction. They only look in the direction of an Irish airline. But at that point, you wouldn't believe that they have done it on a voluntary basis. Okay, somehow, yes, but not just started it themselves. GBAS, that would be also something for ICAO. Mr. Silva, would you have a possibility to offer incentives so that airlines could use GBAS and release it?
Well, sometimes we have some specific projects. Sometimes you have some specific projects on specific implementation issues, but these all need to come from the states. So we have our resources come from the states. So if the states find something important, they need to bring it to CAPE so that we can discuss it together with the other countries and then decide where to allocate the specific resources that we have there.
Also der Impuls von der hessischen Landesregierung ist ausgegangen. Jetzt muss Herr Dobrindt auf Bundesebene
The incentive needs to be started by the Hessian government, and then someday it will also arrive at ICAO. Let me make a comment on Professor Werner. At one point, he is not going far enough. Probably you are surprised that I say that. Let me be more precise. Professor Werner, you've just said that we have noise limits and you need not change anything. You reach it easily. You're always below. One after the other, please. You can reach these noise limits easily with your investment plans, that really help to reduce air traffic noise in general. We want to achieve more, Professor Werner. We want, and I meant that seriously, we want to invest into the two big challenges that we have in traffic and also air traffic. That's energy efficiency, CO2, and noise reduction. And this is only possible with investment. And the minister explained it very clearly. But it doesn't work, if you exert pressure on us. In the middle of the 90s, you introduced an international air traffic market. How can you achieve anything in an international air traffic if you behave like a little island in the big ocean? You have to take the national government along. The federal government needs to set framework conditions in such a way that we can do that, especially in Germany, more strongly than in any other EU member state. We have the air traffic economy where we really have a lot of levies, and that distorts competition. We need to do away with that so that we can use the money that we release for technology investment and competitiveness. Yeah, I'm absolutely with you. Now, as it was directly asked to me, I have to clarify a point. I only take what research institutes, air traffic institutions, and airlines said, what they want to reach. These ICAO goals. And if I only take these goals and say that they are implemented according to what they told us, and then if we defined a noise limit, whether we take the one of the minister or a different one, it doesn't really matter. And then you see this is not really a problem, and it would be within the legal framework. But the precondition is that the goals are really implemented, and that's where we have our problems and doubts. But we are not far apart. There are very good goals that are mentioned in that respect, and that's the new airplanes, that's an improvement of instruments. But we heard about that also yesterday, and also approach and departure procedures. Obviously, that's an important point, as we've learned. And if we take the assistance system, for example, vehicle that comes on top. All these are components that are not even mentioned with ICANA. You know, that's what we have to see. What we have heard today is not in the original ICANA paper. So we have enough potential out there, and they don't cost a lot. The Elbus procedure is not that expensive. There is a lot of potential, a lot of possibilities, but at the end of the day, Mr. Jühle, isn't that heard by many people around the airport? We have seen brochures of a citizens' initiative against air traffic noise. Many people have not noticed that it has become quieter. Why is that so? That's really difficult. But anyways, you notice that there is not enough seriosity when it comes to the intention to really make progress. And that's my criticism, Mr. von Randow. Incentives, okay, that's one instrument that we should use, but when it really becomes difficult, you know, for DFS targets to be set, to enable them to really implement procedures that we heard about today effectively, or if we have to adjust the air traffic law, you become so careful and hesitant and you don't want to touch it. You know, what we need is a big plan, a big global plan of all actors that really wants to achieve what ICANA has suggested. So what do we have to do? We need incentives, but also air traffic tax, rebates, targeted approaches, etc. All that needs to be considered, and also adjustment in the air traffic law, so that it becomes easier to not only use the procedures, but effectively fly them. What do we need to make sure that at the ICAO we have people who can push these issues globally? So we need a total concept so that we can reach what is possible from a technical point of view, what you suggest with ICANA, and then we can get there. But as long as people don't take that seriously enough, and I have to talk to representatives of air traffic, and people say, okay, people affected by noise, well, I wouldn't mind. So if you don't take it seriously, I can't make progress. Of course, air traffic industry needs not only take passengers on board, but also needs to take people on board living on the ground, and people who work there should be happy living there. There are more and more people who don't feel taken along in Germany, and every Monday in Terminal 1 we had demonstrations of people who are really angry, saying politics, the economy doesn't take us seriously. Probably it makes sense that Ryanair flies as of summer, because then people around the airport would like it, because they like the low-cost carrier and go to holiday destinations, and then it becomes more democratic, and they say, okay, all the many business flights that disturb our life in our gardens, you know, are now accepted. I don't understand that logic. Professor Werner has understood what I meant. Whether the holiday planes are quieter or not, I don't know. I don't know whether that's the point. No, whether they are quieter, that was not what I wanted to say. It's rather an emotional issue. We are a technical conference, and whether the issue of Ryanair has so much to do with noise abatement. If so, I'd rather want to use this argument that airlines should remain capable of making investment. That's the driver for innovation. But allow me to say something else in that context. The development is so slow, and one reason is that we are very much concerned. One big concern is what happens in Germany, at destination Germany, if a noise limit is introduced in Frankfurt. How long will it take till we have one in Hamburg, in Berlin, in Munich, you know? always with different rules that don't go together well, that are not transparent, and very soon, very quickly in Germany, we have a cap and thus are not attractive for others. What we would need here, in order to make progress more quickly, would be simple systems, binding systems, reliable systems, and there are blueprints in the world. It's not that we have to invent something new. Very simple, scalable systems, and the big advantage here is that they offer safe investment for airlines, With today's system, it would be that a big order of new planes would not be a decision that a stock corporation can't take because they don't know whether they can still be moved and fulfill the noise limits. And apart from the big investment that the airline has to make, don't you think that they should consider the population, the residents, and that you have to communicate why you fly that way? Mr. Al-Wazir, the discussions that we have internally now should not be completely made public right now. I would answer on the contrary. Once we have a noise limit, it's an incentive to buy new airplanes if you want to also earn good money in the future. And that's the point. Some people misunderstood when Mr. Fraser said before, A350 goes to Munich first, probably it comes to Frankfurt later, probably it has to do with you. And some understood that air traffic industry wants to be treated nicely. No, he meant it differently. The debates that we are running here are one reason that in decision-making committees you also decide on locations and you might take a different view then. And we are always in a situation of ambivalence, a certain extent of ambivalence. Let me put it that way. You mentioned Ryanair, etc., and you wanted to say, if there is noise, at least you can go on holidays at low price, and not only have the noise of the business trips, That's what you meant, didn't you? But at the end of the day, especially at that point, we have this certain degree of ambivalence. On the one hand, municipalities all around the airport, the residents, they are really suffering from air noise. And this is really bad. I mean, although it has become much better in the past decades, we heard about the night flight ban when the airbase where the Galaxy C5 flew here, I remember that. You have to see that very clearly. We have seen and experienced improvements, but we also had a worsening here and there because there was an extension and new regions were affected and new people were affected all of a sudden. But on the other hand, you can see on every homepage of the cities around the airport and find good access, easily accessed, so and so many minutes to the airport. That's this ambivalence that I referred to. Everyone lives with it. And the interesting question now is whether we, as a small Hessian state government, whether we manage to bring that together at this largest German airport, which both, in terms of economic power and attractive location is so important, but on the other hand, it has negative sides, which you see on the other side. And now we need to be able to demonstrate with the example of the airport that this is possible. You can keep your economic power and can still do it better. And there is concern of airlines, for example. If it's in Frankfurt, then we can do it also. Other cities, that's their concern. But Frankfurt, because it's the largest airport, because it's the most densely populated area close by, because it has most traffic, because you have most people or most frequent people concerned, it's the one that is mostly affected. And the interesting question now is that, we have local airports, but a global industry. And how can we really have it elsewhere as well? Because in other countries it doesn't play such an important role. There are exceptions like London, Heathrow and Amsterdam, but how can we make sure that also outside Europe we can really change a global industry? And that's in a federal state in the middle of Germany, in the middle of Europe, where a lot of trust has been damaged and destroyed. That positive vision, Professor Werner, can we extend it to Europe? What we had in mediation is precisely what has been said before. We not only said, we do mediation in order to become quieter at Frankfurt Airport and have fewer planes. No, mediation really wanted to strike this balance. Yes, extension, but at the same time, night flight ban, because it was a central point at that point. And this anti-noise pact, this balance is really important. And the discussion also takes place in Europe. I don't think it's bad if a small Hessian state is pioneer in Europe or in the world. Of course, and that's also an interest of mediation, the private air traffic industry must not suffer from that. That's not what we want. We want to strike a balance, but in both directions. And for that reason, it's a great example for the world how to deal with these problems. And if we can manage the last step, I think we have a model example for a global treatment of issues like that. That would be so great. So let me say thank you at that point, because this conference should come to an end now, and probably you have concrete plans what to do now. So at that point, thank you very much to everyone who has participated, everyone who has prepared and managed this conference, chaired that conference. Thank you very much to all of you. All the best of success on your way towards a quieter air traffic. And the architects of the German Architectural Museum probably help on that way as well. Let me wish for all of us that we leave that hall a little bit disappointed, and that air traffic not only around Frankfurt will become much quieter in the next few years. Thank you very much to you on the panel. Thank you very much to the participants. And now I hand back to Mr. Lanz.